We have, and I think we've already introduced Dr. Chris Was with Kent State. He is, well, obviously in relation to the topic today, he's an editor at what, 3 different academic?
So I'm now editor of Educational Research Theory and Practice, and I'm also an associate editor for BMC Psychology, Frontiers in Psychology, and International, for the International Journal of School Psychology. I am the methods advisor.
Okay.
Okay.
So you've got a lot going on, and I see the bio that you sent me earlier, which y'all will be interested in this, is Chris is the absolute, I think, magician of quantitative research. Because he's the director of the Quantitative Methods Minor for his Department of Psychology there. He's also a faculty within the Coordinating Center for Quantitative Methods at Kent State, which I understand that you help other faculty members figure out what's going on within their research and help them with maybe some more sophisticated testing that they may want to do within their analysis.
Yeah, that's correct. So there's a number of us faculty who actually are part of that work with other faculty members when they have complex designs and need some advice or some guidance regarding the types of analyses to conduct. We're there for that. And we also end up serving on a lot of grants because whenever somebody needs a quant person for the grants, we're there for that as well.
Excellent.
Which actually for me has been a great experience because I've got to meet a lot of different researchers from across the university doing very diverse types of research. So that's been a lot of fun.
That sounds great. Yeah. Get to know what's going on all across your campus there. Well,
exactly.
Today you have been invited to talk with us about all things manuscript reviewing to the editorial process. And so why don't we just go ahead and get started with that? And I'll let you just take the floor.
Okay. Well, great. Well, thank you again for having me, Laura. I really appreciate it. And, since it's a small group, this can be a discussion. Stop me at any time. Happy to answer questions or discuss things. So, I'm not even going to ask these questions because I know who you all are now. But, one of the things that I know that new faculty struggle with, and please share this with everybody, I'm hoping you do, is, how do you actually get started as a reviewer? And I know a lot of faculty have questions about this. And, when I started, it was kind of hit and miss. It was people were just reaching out and, I think you all probably don't remember, but I remember when I used to submit manuscripts on paper and you'd mail them into an editor and then the editor would have to mail them out to people and find reviewers. And it was a difficult process. But it was kind of a hit and miss, and it still is at times. People look up the keywords related to your name and say, oh, that person does this kind of work, I'll send them a review. I now suggest that people actually actively seek out journals that they would like to review for. So, part of that is knowing the process of what a reviewing looks like. So I'm gonna hit, sorry, I had to hit OK there. So in the review process or beginning the review process, I suggest that young faculty members start to look at the types of journals that they would submit to and that they are submitting to. And if there's an opportunity to put your name in the system, put your name in the system. But, early faculty are often, it's funny, dealing with my graduate students, walking them through, well, what does the review process look like? And even young faculty members sometimes really don't understand that process. So I wanted to kind of give you the perspective from a reviewer's position or actually an editor's position. So authors submit an article to the journal. And the first thing that happens, and this is, even though it's not shown here, the first thing that happens is the editor chooses associate editors. And typically when I look for an associate editor, I'm looking for people who have at least a decent amount of expertise in that area. So we find an associate editor, and the associate editor is typically required to screen the paper. And that editor, that associate editor, or sometimes referred to as an action editor, can either reject that manuscript, and we call it a desk rejection, or they can send it out to a couple of reviewers. And I don't know if any of you have experience recently with submitted manuscripts, but as an associate editor and an editor right now, it's becoming very challenging to find reviewers. I've literally sent 60 requests before finding 2 reviewers for articles in the very recent past. And I don't know why that is the case, other than I know we're all a little overwhelmed and busy and life gets there. But so the associate editor tries to find at least typically 2 reviewers for a manuscript. The reviewers read the manuscript, send their comments back to the reviewers or back to the associate editor. And then the associate editor makes a second decision, either may ask for more revisions, rejects the manuscript, or asks for to accept or accepts the manuscript with no other revisions required. I'm sure in your all's experience like mine, I think I've only had one paper my entire career accepted as is without having gone through 2 reviews. So that's common. I mean, that's our job as reviewers, is to improve the science, right? And to help others portray their science in a way that's easily readable and understandable. So that's the basic peer review process. One of the things I'm encouraging young faculty members to do, and even my graduate students to do at this point, is to get themselves registered for ORCID and Publons. And, you know, Publons for researchers is really important in this kind of competitive research environment we're in right now. You know, more and more we're asked to demonstrate our impact that we have in service. And as a reviewer, as an action editor, as an editor, you know, that really is an important thing to keep track of. And I love the fact that we have ORCID and Publons that actually asks you if you'd like to keep track of your reviews these days. I think it's very nice. So it's not actually an easy thing to do on your own, to keep track of all your reviews. So I really like and encourage people to register with these. The other things I really like about both ORCID and Publons is they're integrated into Web of Science now. Your ORCID ID is a permanent ID that tracks you. More and more journals are actually asking for your ORCID ID when you submit a manuscript. And honestly, as an editor, that's become very useful, because when authors submit their ORCID ID, it's very easy for me to go look that up, find out the kind of work they've done in the past. What are the keywords that I should send to reviewers? So again, it also affiliates you with all your grants and that type of information. So I really encourage people, both as reviewers and authors, to register with ORCID and Publons. And by the shaking of your heads, I'm assuming you all are already. Good. And again, like I mentioned before, if you're not being asked to do reviews, then register yourself with some journals that you publish in, are interested in publishing it, or interested in reviewing it. And that's a simple process. You know, you can just log onto almost any journal's website now, and I believe I sorry about that. Screen captured this from, is this a Scopus? This might be a Scopus webpage. But again, it's just, you know, create your ORCID ID, fill in your information, and let people know when you're available to actually review manuscripts. And I do my best to keep this updated. There's not much that changes. At this point in my career, not much is changing, but with young faculty members, it's a good thing to keep this updated.
Yeah, hey, Chris, I'm interested in the idea that you can now track your reviews on ORCID on both of those sites. I wasn't aware of that until you just said it. So somehow, if you said it before, I missed it, but I, have an ORCID account and I just didn't, I mean, that's a great way to record your manuscripts because I usually, in my report that I give at the end of the year, I will just say reviewed 3 manuscripts for whatever journals and not
Yep.
really, it's a better way of making that more professional as well as looking at the type of work that you do in comparison to what you're reviewing and the journals that you're reviewing for too. So I like that we can do that now, and so I'm going to have to start doing that too. Keep that.
Yeah, and one thing to look for as you do reviews. Many of the journals now will actually have a checkbox. Would you like to get Publons or ORCID credit for this review? And I encourage people, yeah, do that, because then exactly like you said, we have to do the same thing every year. I'm like, well, in June, I think I reviewed for, don't have to do that anymore. I just pull it up and there it is. So it is a very nice feature. And then, metacognition is one of the areas I study. Google your search terms and find those journals that are publishing in that area. Lots of people in my field use Web of Science or PsycInfo. I'm really a big fan of Google Scholar. I really am. It's easy to use, and the keywords are very useful, and you can find the types of journals that you should be reviewing for very easily that way. Where am I? In some general strategies, really, when we're thinking about reviewing, being a quality reviewer, there's some really simple strategies that I encourage people to think about. First of all, know the type of manuscripts you're reviewing. I see a lot of young faculty members make a simple mistake by reading an abstract and thinking, oh yeah, I should review that one. I really encourage people to get a little better understanding of the manuscript before they say yes or no. Read the abstract, read the keywords, but then I also suggest read the methodology and even at least skim the methodology and skim the results, because you're not always going to be an expert in everything about the manuscript, right? You might have expertise in the field, but not expertise in the methodology, or not expertise in the results or the analyses. And I don't think you should eliminate yourself because you're not an expert in all 3. But you should be, or should have, expertise in at least one of those areas. And I'm sure you all have this experience. I mentioned earlier that I'm having trouble finding reviewers. Well, because of that, we're now often sent manuscripts that are probably not in our area of expertise. And I really encourage people to take a good look beyond the abstract. Is this a manuscript I should be reviewing? Do I feel like I have the qualifications to review this manuscript? And if you're not comfortable, say no. There's nothing wrong with saying no to a review if you're not comfortable. And that goes along with knowing thyself, right? Really knowing what your area of expertise is, knowing where you, what types of methodologies and analyses that you're comfortable talking about, and really being honest with yourself and the editors about whether or not you're qualified to review this manuscript. And that's why, if you think about the reviewer portholes, if you say you don't want to review a manuscript, one of the options is to say, this is not in my area of expertise. And that's also helpful for us as editors, as I now know, I shouldn't send this person those types of manuscripts. This goes right along with that, knowing the power of first impressions. We all know that a first impression is important. And so when I interact with reviewers and as an associate editor, interact with editors of journals, I always try and put my best foot forward. I know a lot of people, a lot of reviewers that never use the comments to the editor section. They simply make their comments to the authors and go from there. I'm impressed when people tell me I'm an expert in metacognition and I was able to understand the theoretical aspects of this manuscript and I really understood their methodology, but their analyses were beyond my expertise. Let the editors know that. Let the editors know if there's anything that you see as a fatal flaw in the paper, especially, and we'll talk about this later, being a critical but kind reviewer, you can say things to the editors that you wouldn't say to the authors. And so making that first impression with both your the people that you're reviewing, but also the people you're reviewing for, is really important to help establish yourself as a quality reviewer and get yourself into editorial positions. And then we want to think about writing styles. So the issue with writing style, and I'm sure you're all experiencing this as higher ed educators these days. I'm finding a lot of our undergraduate students and even graduate students are not quality writers. And it took me a long time. I'll admit, I still laugh about the fact that I'm not a great writer. I've just learned to figure out how to do it. Writing style is something that you should attend to, but it's also important to be aware that although a manuscript might not be well organized or well written, there might be really good research in that manuscript. So one of the things I say often is that even though the writing may be weak, a well-designed study with appropriate analysis and appropriate conclusions, we want to see that stuff published. So providing authors with feedback regarding their writing style is important, especially if we go back to knowing thyself. If you know you're a good writer, help the authors with their writing. One of the things that really helped me, and I was not good at this when I completed my PhD and first started as an assistant professor, I was lucky to have a mentor who was a very good writer, and I didn't write in an expository manner. I just kind of made points and that was it. Telling a good story with your research is important. So if you are a good writer and you get these manuscripts that have really great ideas and a really good theory and a really good methodology, but the writing's not good, help the authors with that writing. And that's actually a comment you can make to the editors too, is, hey, I think this is a really interesting study. However, the writing's not clear. And make suggestions that would make the writing clear for the authors. Also, looking for novelty in the research. And it's funny how all of these ideas kind of tie together. If you are not an expert in the literature, it's often difficult to find the novelty in that study or in that investigation. So I say be very familiar with the literature or stay in your lane, right? If it's not a literature you're very familiar with, you probably can't comment on the novelty of the research. But if it is research you're very familiar with, a literature you're familiar with, do comment on the novelty. This is a very novel study. And again, that goes back to the quality of the writing. In reviews, especially as an associate editor, I've encouraged authors to say, this is how this study is novel when they're not giving themselves enough credit. So on the other hand, I've also done the opposite, where I've told authors, this isn't as novel as you think it is or as unique as you think it is. You may want to tone it down a little bit. So being familiar with your literature really helps you determine, is this study novel? And encourage the authors, if it is, to point that out and help them point out how it's novel. Whether it's a unique methodology, a different twist on a theory or a hypothesis, help them find that. Now, when you're making recommendations, I always say, provide examples and provide evidence. So if there is contradictory or contrary evidence to what the authors are presenting, help them present that in a way that actually supports their conclusions, right? If they've missed something in the literature, point that out to them and show them the examples. Also, if there's other evidence, whether it's supportive or it doesn't support their conclusions, and they missed that evidence, point it out to them. There's nothing wrong with saying, you missed this study by Johnson et al. You might want to cite that because it supports your conclusions. Or you missed this study by Johnson et al. And it's contrary to your conclusions. And so by not pointing it out, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. So lots of examples and lots of evidence to support your recommendations. And that goes along with references. I love when reviewers give me specific references that the authors may have missed. And include the citations. One thing that kind of annoys me is when reviewers say, well, Smith 2000 said this. Don't make the author go look for that citation. Give them the entire citation. It's easy in Google Scholar to click cite and pull that out for them. And it also makes it very easy for them to then revise their manuscripts. If you give them the examples, you give them the references that you hope to improve their study, great. I also suggest, and I don't think this is a necessity, because some reviewers are very good at pointing out the revisions they'd like to see in a document. Other reviewers use track changes or make comments in the actual manuscript. I'm okay with either one, but if you're going to make suggestions in the manuscript, I suggest or request that they're very specific, right? You highlight what you'd like to see changed, you make a couple of suggestions. I've had reviewers who literally just send me back highlighted stuff, and it's like, well, why did you highlight that? What does that mean for the author? So be specific, provide references. And be thorough. And again, specificity is very important. Ambiguous and general comments are not helpful, right? Now let's go back to writing style. Saying something like, I don't think the manuscript was clearly written, or it was difficult to understand. If you're going to say something of that nature, then be specific and provide some specific examples. Paragraph 2 on page 5, you could have worded it this way. And you might say it to the author. I think this is more of an editor's comment. If it's clear that the authors are writing and English is their second language, mention to the editor that they could use an English editor, right? There's nothing wrong with that, because you want that author to be able to communicate their ideas clearly and concisely. So be specific about things you want to see improved, and show the authors how they might do that. Provide them with some examples of how to do that. And be specific with the, again, with the editors. If there's things that you see that need fixing, tell the editors, I'd like to see this fixed, and maybe suggest editing for the authors. And then conduct the review as if you were receiving it. I don't know if any of you have ever received a harsh review before. I have. Yeah, and it's not helpful, right? I read a great article not too long ago that I can't remember where it was published, but it was in Chronicle of Higher Ed. And it was an article entitled, Are We Training Bulldogs? Or yes, Are We Training Bulldogs for Reviewers? And you don't have to be harsh with people, right? We're all trying to better our science. So I really do say, write it like you're writing to yourself. How would you critique yourself? How would you want to hear the comments and the critiques that you're giving? It just gives you a little bit of humility as you're writing. I would also find a review mentor. And if you're dealing with any, graduate students, whether master's level, PhD level, even undergraduates, mentor them in the review process. But find a mentor, find somebody who's done a lot of reviews, maybe as an associate editor, and actually ask them to work with you on a review or two, or to share some examples of reviews they've conducted. It makes the process so much easier when you just don't jump in and go, okay, now I have to review a manuscript. I don't know how to do this. I make all of my graduate students review papers with me, just so they get the habit of seeing what is it like to respond? How do I do this in a way that is helpful and supportive? And it's just like anything else we do in academia. A mentor is always going to benefit. Okay, some pitfalls to avoid in reviewing. The first is, of course, don't miss your deadlines. Now, the deadline is given because we're trying to expedite the process. And be honest and upfront about the timeline, right? If an editor or associate editor asks you to return it in 30 days and you really want to do the review and you can't do it in those 30 days, ask for an extension. We're typically very willing to give an extension if it's asked for. It's, when I have to, the nice thing is we don't have to do it anymore, but when reminders go out, I'd much rather not have to remind reviewers and just say, well, I need 60 days or 45 days to review it, and that's fine. When making comments, another pitfall. When making comments, I ask people to be very specific. Like, for example, on page 6, line 54, you said this, or you state this. So people know exactly where to look for your comments, your critiques, what you're talking about. I also say, mention strengths before you mention weaknesses, right? And we all know this, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but it just gives the author an opportunity to be open-minded about your critiques when you mention their strengths and mention their weaknesses. And I would also say, consider the big issues first, right? And very often, and we'll talk about how to format your reviews in a moment, but often, we'll do a major concerns and minor concerns. And I really like that because you should deal with the big issues first, and then the minor stuff comes later. I'm also going to say something about that some action editors and editors disagree with me on this. Others agree with me. So I think it's part of your own style. You don't have to be the APA police, right? We really don't have to be the formatting guidelining police, especially anymore because we have editors that, text editors that do that work anymore. But if it's really obvious that the authors did not put in any effort to do that, then you can mention that to them. So, please try and follow the APA guidelines. It makes everybody's job easier. But focus on the big issues. For example, how does your investigation or your study build on the extant literature, the existing literature? That's a big issue that you want to address right away. And if it's a strength, address that. Hey, your work really builds on what is out there. If it doesn't, ask them how they might improve it or suggest improvements for that. Talk about the appropriateness of the design, the sample, and the analysis, right? Is the study design sound? Is your sample appropriate for the type of study? And is the analysis appropriate? Along those same lines, I also say then, are the conclusions derived from the results? I'm probably as bad as anybody where I like to overstep what my data actually tells me. And so what I've often told my graduate students, and I tell authors, stick close to the data, right? Here's what my data says, here's my conclusions. So those are big picture issues you can address with the authors. Also offer specific suggestions for improvement. Again, using track changes is useful. And if you're not going to use track changes, make sure you specify on the line, this page, this is what I'd like to see or how you might improve it. If you have any suggestions for citations they missed and references, include them. I also, again, I'm going to say, be kind, but be constructive, right? Start with the good, provide the heart of the critique at first, and then go down to the minor issues or more detailed issues you'd like to deal with. And if you really think it's a quality study and should be published with revision, I like when reviewers actually tell the authors that, right? So at the end of the review, I'd like to say something like, I really enjoyed your study. I hope that my suggestions will improve the manuscript, and I encourage you to revise and resubmit. Because many journals anymore don't use that revise and resubmit language. They use reject with an invitation to resubmit. So as a reviewer, I like to say, if I think it's a good study and I want to see it published, I encourage you to revise and resubmit your manuscript. Don't toot your own horn. And I say this, and I'm sure you've all experienced this. Have you ever gotten a review back where the reviewer clearly says you should cite somebody? It's clearly them, and it's not really that related to the review or the paper. I say it's okay to recommend they read your work if it's directly related and relevant to the study they're attempting to publish. If it's not, don't toot your own horn, right? It's just not relevant. And I like my reviewers to be humble, and I like to try and be humble in my reviews, right? We're all in this, my philosophy of science is we're all in this trying to make the science better. So, don't toot your own horn. If it's relevant, then say, yeah, you should cite this paper. But if it's just because you want to get cited, it's not favorable to me. And this is another big fatal flaw I've come across. Don't string authors along. If you don't think the manuscript should be published, don't tell them you like the work and you like to see it revised and resubmitted. Tell them you don't think it's appropriate for this journal. And actually, that's a phrase I like to use as a reviewer, is this submission is not appropriate for this journal. And again, I hope my comments can help you improve the manuscript when you submit elsewhere. But to say, oh, this is okay work and I'd like to see it published in this journal when you really don't, that's not fair to the authors. It's also not fair to the editorial team because they have to deal with that. So be honest, and don't string the authors along. And even though this term is here, I don't like fatal error and fatal flaws. I like using language like it's not appropriate for this outlet. Yeah, so another way to say that is if you don't truly feel a resubmission should be rejected on your first review, then say that. That's just what's so. Now, regarding empirical manuscripts, read the entire manuscript, noting questions as they arise, and whether the manuscript is logically cohesive. When reviewing a manuscript that involves empirical research, here's the things I like to think about. Does the introduction provide the appropriate framework for the research questions and the hypotheses? Also, does the introduction provide sufficient detail for the methods, right? Sometimes authors jump from their theoretical ideas and their hypotheses into the methods without setting up why are these methods appropriate. So I think that's important to look for. And does the methodology provide sufficient detail for replication? That's really important when thinking about the methods is, as a reader, could I replicate what these authors have done? Do the results and the hypotheses or research questions, again, are they connected to the introduction? And does the discussion provide information that fits with and extends the framework of the theory that they're proposing? Oh, and the abstract. You know, we all know how fun it is to try and get everything into 150 to 250 words. It's not easy. But just make sure that the abstract includes enough information from each section of the manuscript that if I was reading this manuscript, if I just read the abstract to know if this is relevant study to me, I could do that. I think authors are getting better and better because we've been kind of pushing what abstract should look like, but it is hard to get that stuff into 250 words. So encourage the authors, if you see something missing in the abstract. Often I'll read abstracts that don't actually provide the conclusion. They provide a basic introduction, some methodology stuff, and then they kind of leave it as an open-ended question. Include a concluding statement in your abstract so readers can follow you. So I think the abstract is important. And then also keywords. You know, if authors provide keywords that don't make sense, encourage them. Look for the keywords that you would think, oh, this would probably be a better keyword than that one. So again, we were thinking about the introduction. Does it provide a good description of the problem and its importance? One of the things we do at Kent State with our PhD students is they all have to do a fourth-year talk, which is like a job talk. And the one thing that I notice students don't stress is the importance of their research. So have authors, you know, if it's important research, they should be mentioning why is this important in the introduction. Describe the problem, why it's important. And then the literature review. Are they presenting the theoretical underpinnings, the trends, the themes, and the gaps in the literature? Now, one thing I've tried to wean my students from is actually saying this study is being conducted because there is a gap in the literature. That phrasing I don't like, but that's what you're doing, right? Is you're filling in what's the logical extension of this research. So that should be in the literature review. And the purpose of the present study, how does it advance our past research? And then a brief description and rationale for the hypothesis or research questions. That's what I like to see in an introduction. And honestly, I kind of use this frame as how I look for it, right? I always, I tell my students, the way I like to see things written, especially in an introduction, is tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them, right? And I love that in the first part of an introduction. Here's the problem and why it's important. Then everything else should just flow from there. My literature reviews tells me why it's an important problem. The purpose of my research tells me how it's advancing what's going on, and then a brief description of the study to get me into the methods section. And the methods, again, pretty straightforward. You know, does the method seem appropriate for the type of research and the research questions? Is there sufficient detail to replicate the study? Are the authors basing their measures on previous research, or did they create their dependent variables? And we all know it goes along with the psychometrics of creating your own research variables. Is it self-perception or behavioral data? Are they reporting the reliability and validity? This is really important. And is there a sufficient description of participants? It seems to me recently, authors are getting very sloppy about demographics. I've received lots of papers where people don't even tell me how many male, female, how many this, that. It's just there was 184 undergraduates in this study. Describe the sample. Make sure that the authors are describing the sample well. And then the results, are they explicitly organized by research question or hypothesis? I like to encourage writers to have their results section parallel to their methods section, right? So they should kind of flow in the same way. It just makes it more readable. Are there any additional analyses that might be useful to address other research questions or the hypotheses? So if you can think of additional analyses that weren't conducted, suggest them. If multiple types of analysis, possible inclusions of an outline of the analyses. So another way to say that, and a thing I like to see is, if it's a complex set of analyses, I like to see an analytical plan at the beginning of the results section. Here's how we chose to break down our results, and this is how we'll present them. So it's not necessary, but when we have lots of complex analyses, sometimes it's nice just to give the reader an opportunity to see, this is how I'm going to lay this out for you. Make sure the statistical tests are appropriate. Make sure they're accurately reporting the statistical results, and, you know, inclusion of any measures of effect size or confidence intervals for appropriate tests that meet those. Now, I'm not a qualitative researcher, but I would say the same thing regarding qualitative research, right? Talk about your methods, make sure they're clear, make sure they're appropriate, and make sure that a reader could not only replicate your design, but would know how to do the same type of qualitative research if that's what you're doing. Is the discussion organized by research questions and hypothesis? Again, I argue parallel your methods, parallel your analyses, write the discussion the same way, and make sure the authors do. Do they discuss the results in the context of past research and hypotheses? Do they offer alternative explanations for the findings? I'd like to see that. I'd like to see, hey, you could interpret it this way as well. Do they draw conclusions without overstating the implications? Have they considered the limitations? And have they suggested directions for future research? Lots of authors and even some journals now ask for specific limitations sections and future directions sections. I don't think that's necessary. If the journal asks for it, then good. But even if you don't have a specific section for it, in your discussion, you should discuss the limitations, because all of our research does have limitations, and suggest future research. And if you're in an education field and you have teaching implications, suggest those. And then use of figures, you know, really do the figures. Are they really present and clear, and are they necessary, right? If you have two numbers, you don't have to put them in a table. Figures are nice because it's easier for all of us to understand a figure than have to read through numbers, but only if they're appropriate, and really do they present the data clearly. And if there's other tables or figures you would like to see, suggest them. Authors don't always put everything in the results section that you'd like to see, so suggest a table if it would make the data easier to digest. And then if you're doing reviews of non-data type manuscripts, like theoretical papers or something, make sure it's based on past research and I'm sorry, my dogs just came home and attacked me. My wife must have just picked up the dogs from the daycare. So again, if it's a teaching manuscript, does it provide practical teaching implications? Will the manuscript have broad appeal? And again, that's something to think about with the journal. Is it appropriate for this journal? Does it fit this journal? And when we're thinking about teaching or psychology, is it of value to people who are teaching psychology? And then finally, how to write your review. Well, I think that's all based on your preferences, your writing styles. I know lots of people who like to sit down and write in large chunks of time. I know reviewers that will sit, read the paper, and write the reviews on the spot. As a reviewer, what I like to do is I like to read the manuscript and then put it away. I read it, I come back to it, and then I ask myself the questions. Okay, what kind of questions do I have? What concerns do I have? But first, I just try and digest it without being in the reviewer mindset. I like to be in the consumer mindset the first time I read it, then go back and read it and ask my questions. And then if I have to read it again to actually point out some of the things I'd like to see corrected or some suggestions I have, I do that. But I think that's all personal preference. How do you feel when what's the best writing style for you? And then really, again, using the lines and numbers, I'm always going to suggest that that's very useful for the author. And then just a simple way to think about organizing the manuscript. Notes to the editor, notes to the author, your substantive or major comments and concerns, minor concerns or corrections of the manuscript. And you can see, I like this example. Much of the manuscript needs to be put in APA 7th format. Rather than being an APA police officer and just noting everything, just here's some ideas or some things you missed that would be helpful in APA style. And then again, some people like to organize their reviews by section. And I think that's very useful for the authors. So I'm okay with reviewers doing it by substantive comments versus concerns. I'm also okay with people doing it by section because both are easy for the authors to then see where they could make corrections and fix things. Be constructive in your criticism. We all know that, right? Just providing authors with constructive criticism. I don't know if you're all familiar with the constructive criticism sandwich, but this was kind of pounded into me by my former chair of our department because she said I was too mean to the graduate students. So now everything I do is a criticism sandwich, right? Begin with something positive, give praise for their efforts and the strong points, provide some comments and compliments, then provide the criticism or critique, remind them of the strong points. And then, I honestly, I've started about 5 or 6 years ago. I actually thank authors for the opportunity to read their work before it's published. It's a great opportunity to see what's going on in the field even before stuff gets published. So I give them thanks and say, hey, I hope that my reviews support you in moving forward with your research. Because again, to me, that's the goal, that's the philosophy. And then I'm sorry, I can't even see what I said. Oh, examples of what to say. Good. I would like to finish just on some things that I like to see. So I might be thinking to myself, the authors have overinterpreted the findings. What I might say is the authors aim to demonstrate X, Y, Z. However, the data doesn't fully support that conclusion. Right? It's a much nicer way to say, I think you've overinterpreted your findings. I might think the manuscript is fatally flawed. I might even say that in my comments to the editor, but what I might say to the author is the study doesn't seem to be sound or appear to be sound, or you've missed something crucial here. And if I say you missed something crucial here, I'm going to tell them what it is. The technical details don't make sense. I might say something like the technical details should be expanded and clarified to ensure that the readers understand exactly what the study did. Or I might say, you know, there's not enough detail in the methods section for someone else to replicate it. And I would give them that specific suggestion. You might think the writing is terrible. The author should revise the language to improve readability is a much nicer way to say that. It's obvious that this type of experiment should have been included. I have no idea why the authors didn't use it. This is a big mistake. That is actually a quote from a review I received at one point in my career. What I would have liked to heard was something along the lines of the authors were off to a good start. However, this study requires additional experiments, particularly tell me what I missed. And alternatively, the author should include more information that clarifies and justifies their choice of methods. So if you think something's missing, like an experiment, tell them, I would have done this. Don't be this reviewer. These are actually pulled from Aaron Richmond. If you all know Aaron Richmond's Twitter feed, he sent these. Just got a journal paper review that consists of exactly 5 sentences. Review was positive, but 5 short sentences about a 36-page manuscript is probably not a detailed enough review. Dear reviewer, you could have at least read the paper beyond the abstract. Have you ever felt that way when you've gotten a review? It's like, I don't think this person actually read my paper. Please don't be that reviewer. Or this one, really overhandling this manuscript, invited reviewers don't respond, and the ones who don't decline. So this is very typical of why I get anymore. 16 declined, 1 completed. But be this reviewer. This is a comment someone sent to Aaron. This paper was a pleasure to read, and I have only a couple small suggestions. You know, that's just great. Getting a paper rejected isn't actually a bad thing, provided the reviewers give you some feedback. You know, it lets enhance the paper and get it done. I love when reviewers give me feedback that really will help me improve the manuscript. Even if it's rejected, it's worth the 30-day wait. Happy with the positive reviews of an article I resubmitted. So the ultimate goal, again, for me, is we're trying to help authors improve their science. That's the goal of being a reviewer and an editor. So I hope I've given you some insights into how to do that, and I'm happy to field any questions if you have them.
Wow, that was excellent.
Oh, good.
Now that I'm transitioning into going back to do faculty kinds of things, this is precisely what I needed to fill my head with. It's wisdom, and I'm going to use it carefully.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, and you talk about one of your goals is to help writers and future researchers with the review process. But even listening to just listening to this presentation about how to be a better reviewer helps people become a better writer and become a better researcher. Because I was thinking of things as you were going through some of the, step-by-step pieces. I was like, yeah, I've got a manuscript where I forgot to do that. So I got to go back in and do that. So just thinking about this whole process is, many perspectives on that. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, good. No, I think that's absolutely true. Is when you think about how a reviewer is going to approach your writing, and honestly, being a reviewer and associate editor has helped me so much, because it's like, oh, I see where people miss things that I've missed in the past, and now I think about, how would I incorporate that into my own writing and my own manuscripts?
Yep, exactly.
Good.
Any
Anything
other
else?
thoughts or questions?
I think we need a little seat.
Thank you so much. I got so many harsh comment about my manuscript, but I want to be a nice and good qualified reviewer for the future. So it was really helpful. Thank you.
No, you're welcome. And again, I do know that we often get criticism that seems harsh. And I know what reviewers are attempting to do. I just think being a thoughtful critique or a thoughtful reviewer, you don't have to be harsh. Just tell them what they need to do to make it better.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think a lot of people miss that process of just help me be better, right?
Yeah.
That's what we all want to do. We just want to be better at what we're doing. So,
Exactly. And we just want to move the science forward. And the way to do that is, you know, I often want to think of reviewing should be a discussion or a conversation. Right. So if one of my students came into me and said, hey, I had this idea and here's what I think, I'd sit and have a conversation with them about how to improve that idea. Well, your review should be the same thing. How do we improve your ideas?
yeah. Yep.
Sounds
Anything
like
else?
application for a life philosophy. So
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. All right. With nothing else, I thank you very much for joining us and having time to spend with us today. And
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
yeah, imparting your wisdom both on writing and reviewing and how to be better at both. Always appreciated, and hopefully I'll see you this fall.
Yes, absolutely.
Manuscripts, yeah.
And Laura, if you can't find the PowerPoints again, just let me know and I'll send them to you.
Okay, I think yeah, I can pull them up again. So no problem with that. All right.
Thank you all very much.
So
thank you
much.
so much.